Have you ever seen a temple you were warned never to enter after dark? In Bangkok, there is one place locals avoid so fiercely, they won't even say its name out loud. They whisper about shoes left behind at the gates, chanting that doesn't stop when the monks die, and debts that the living can never repay. Tonight, I want to tell you about the time I ignored those warnings and learned that once a temple calls your name, you never really leave. Before we begin, tell me in the comments, would you dare step inside if everyone around you told you not to? They told me not to go near Wat Siwalee after dark. The warning wasn't whispered like a campfire story or wrapped in superstition. It was blunt, sharp, like a knife pressed to my throat. In Bangkok, temples are everywhere. They rise like silent guardians above the chaos of traffic and neon lights. But Wat Siwalee, hidden at the edge of the city, swallowed by trees, was different. It wasn't on the tourist maps. The monks never spoke its name. And the locals, they only mentioned it when they thought no foreigner was listening. They said if you lingered near its gates after sundown, you'd hear chanting. Not the kind of melodic prayer that drifts from temple loudspeakers at dusk. This chanting was deeper, older. It came from monks who had been dead for centuries. The stories always ended the same way. Someone vanished. Their shoes left neatly by the entrance. Their offerings still sitting on the stone steps. But no body ever found. I should have listened. But curiosity God. It's the one sin I can never shake. And in Thailand, curiosity doesn't just get you in trouble. It gets you marked. My name is Michael Carter. I'm 33 years old. And I have been living in Bangkok for just under 2 years. Teaching English to restless teenagers in a crowded private school wasn't exactly the dream I had when I first left the States. But it was a way out. Out of debts. Out of a dead marriage. Out of the gnawing sense that my life had stopped moving somewhere back in Ohio. Thailand was supposed to be my reset button. And for a while, it worked. I learned enough Thai to order food without pointing awkwardly at menus. I learned to smile through the humid chaos of rush hour traffic. And I even learned how to drink Mekong whiskey without coughing up a lung. But more than anything, I learned how deeply religion and superstition are woven into the air here. In America, ghosts are Halloween costumes. In Thailand, they're part of the fabric of daily life. You don't just laugh at them. You make space for them. Which is how I first heard about Wat Siwalee. I was sitting at a night market in Bangkok, eating grilled chicken skewers and sticky rice, when two old men at the next table lowered their voices mid-conversation. They kept glancing toward me, then back at each other. I caught just enough Thai to hear the word Wat Temple, then Siwalee. The tone in their voices was not casual. It was heavy, weighted. One of them noticed me listening. He froze, his eyes narrowing like he'd said something forbidden. Then he muttered, almost spitting it into his beer. Farang shouldn't know, especially him. That was the first time I felt it, like the name of that temple carried something toxic, something dangerous, even if you only spoke it aloud. Later, when I asked one of my students about it, she wouldn't meet my eyes. She only whispered, "Don't go there, teacher." Even monks avoid it. Then she drew a small charm in her notebook, a circle with curling lines. Before crossing it out so quickly, the paper nearly tore. The way she did it made my stomach tighten. A week later, in another market, I passed a stall selling amulets and talismans. The old man behind the counter wore faded orange robes. He had once been a monk. I think when I asked him about Wat Siwalee, He stiffened. His hand shook as he counted change. And then he said something I'll never forget. If you hear the chanting, do not answer. If you see the light, do not follow. If you feel the hands, do not struggle. He said it with such gravity that it didn't sound like advice. It sounded like law. From that moment, Wat Siwalee wasn't just a rumor anymore. It became a magnet, something I couldn't stop thinking about, a place pressing on the edge of my thoughts, daring me to step closer. On Thursday, in late rainy season, at 7:50 p.m., the first omen arrived so gently I almost missed it. I was finishing lesson plans in my tiny apartment near Ramkhamhaeng Road, the fan ticking its soft 3-second loop, a gecko clicking from somewhere inside the wall. The city outside moved like a distant tide, motorbikes. The thud of bass from a bar I never went to, a vendor calling out grilled pork skewers in a sing-song voice. I should have been relaxed. I was not, ever since the market stall and the old man's 3 rules. Wat Siwalee kept circling back. It would leave for an hour, then return. Like a mosquito you cannot slap. When my mind wandered, it wandered there. I had recorded a few ambient clips earlier that week for my students' little sound snapshots of Bangkok. The plan was to have them write descriptive paragraphs. I pressed play on my phone and let the familiar noises roll. Tuk-tuk engines, the wet hiss of tires on Sukhumvit after a sudden rain, a temple loudspeaker at dusk reciting a soft evening prayer. I had heard 100 times. Then the track changed to one I did not remember recording. It was chanting, not the temple loudspeaker kind, not the radio kind, not the soft melodic cadence that floats like warm smoke through the alleys at sunset. This was older. The rhythm stuttered in places, then surged, like someone trying to remember words carved into their bones. The voices sounded deep and hollow, and there was a texture under the sound like a low fire chewing through damp wood. I froze. The screen showed a file name I had never typed. Siwalee Field, M4A. At 7:51 p.m., I pressed pause. The room felt smaller. I could hear my breathing in the fan's 3-second loop. I told myself it was a glitch. Phones mislabel things. I had probably saved something under a weird name and forgotten. I told myself many things. At 7:53 p.m., I pressed play again and held the phone close to my ear. The chanting moved in waves. I could not make out the words, but the vowels rolled in a low tide, and the consonants snapped like sparks. For several seconds, the voices were distant. Then the sound reared up, as if the chanters had turned to face the microphone that was not there. From somewhere inside the recording, maybe under it, maybe through, it came the dry click of prayer beads. Then a lighter sound, like fingernails tapping a wooden floor. I turned the volume down to the lowest notch. A whisper would have drowned it out. The voices kept the same strength. I turned the volume to 0. The voices remained. I flung the phone onto the bed. It went silent. The fan resumed its soft counting. I stared at the phone, as if it might open its own eyes. When it did not, I laughed, too loud and too forced, and pretended the laugh had fixed something. At 8:11 p.m. the door rattled. Not a knock, a rattle, as if someone was testing the handle without wanting to be caught. I stood, walked to the door, and looked through the peephole. The concrete hallway ran off to the elevator, pale and empty under a tired fluorescent tube. The door's metal handle was still. When I lowered my eye from the peephole, something brushed the back of my right hand, a soft thread-like touch, the way loose fabric grazes skin. I looked down. A white cord sin. The blessed thread, tied in many ceremonies, was looped around my wrist. It had not been there a second ago. The knot was tidy, a monk's simple square, the way I had seen it done at school. Blessings. For a heartbeat, my chest lifted in relief. Protection. A kindly neighbor. A well-meaning prank. Something human to hold on to. Then the cord warmed, not hot. Warm, like breath through cotton. The warmth moved around my wrist in a slow circle, and where it passed, the skin prickled. A faint smell rose with its smoke, not sharp, but old, like a robe that has lived too long near a brazier. The knot tightened. I tried to slip a finger under the loop. The cord did not give. The warmth finished one circle, then another. After the third circle, the cord cooled and went slack. When I lifted it to the light, there was a narrow grey soot on the inside fiber where it had touched my skin. I washed my hands for a full minute, soap foaming, water running hard. The soot line did not leave. It was not on the cord. It was on me, a thin ring around my wrist like a child had traced it in charcoal. At 8:20 p.m., my phone lit up on the bed. A message from Nok, my colleague in the Thai department, my occasional drinking partner, the one person at school who did not treat me like a permanent tourist. You still awake? My aunt knows a monk. Do not go to that place. He said there is a mark on you already. I typed, what place? Then backspaced. Nok did not like the name spoken. I asked, how does he know? Then erased that too. What I sent was plain and cowardly. I am awake. The 3 dots pulsed, stopped, returned. Bring jasmine in the morning. 4 sticks of incense. No speech when you put them down. If you must speak, say only your name, only my name. That detail stung. A way to be seen without asking to be answered. I stared at the soot ring around my wrist and thought of the old man at the market. If you hear the chanting, do not answer. If you see the light, do not follow. If you feel the hands, do not struggle. Hands. The word clung to me. I pressed my fingers to the ring of soot. My skin thrummed as if something below the surface had noticed the attention. At 8:32 p.m., the chanting returned. No phone, no speakers. It came from the hallway, then from behind me, then from the bathroom mirror, as if the glass itself had learned a prayer. The voices were not loud. That made them worse. Their steadiness suggested they would continue whether I listened or not, whether I screamed or not, whether I existed or not. I walked to the balcony and slid the door open. Humid night air rolled in, carrying a smell of wet concrete and fried garlic. Down on the street, a man laughed, a clean human sound that broke the pressure in my chest for a moment. I leaned on the railing and looked across at the other building. On the 6th floor opposite my unit, a light flickered on, off, on, off, settling into an irregular pulse. Someone moved past the window. A long, slow movement, like cloth turning in water. I told myself it was an old curtain. Then, for a single beat, the light stabilized, and I saw into the room. It was empty. No furniture, no person, no curtain. The light went out. At 8:36 p.m., my phone vibrated again. Another message from Nok. He says if they gave you a thread without a blessing, cut it. But do not cut it inside. Cut it outside your door. Step over it as you leave. Do not look back. I typed, who is he? And this time I sent it. A monk who left the robe but kept the vows. Wat Siwalee. On the canal, he has seen Sikh that place. He said the ones there do not like debt. They collect. If they marked you, someone called you by name where you did not belong. My stomach tightened. Earlier that afternoon, during dismissal, a first-year student had giggled with her friends and called, "Michael teacher," down the hallway. A harmless thing, but the way the sound had slapped off the concrete and carried reminded me now of chanting rolling through a tube. I took a pair of scissors from the drawer. The metal felt cooler than the room. At the door I paused. The hallway light hummed its weak hive song. I opened the lock, stepped into the threshold, and lifted the white cord. For a moment, I imagined the old man's voice right behind me, the breath warm and papery against my ear. "If you feel the hands, do not struggle." I set the scissors to the thread. The thread parted with a small, almost apologetic sound. The two ends fell against my wrist, then slid down into my open palm. I placed the pieces neatly on the floor outside the door, parallel, like white commas. I stepped over them. The chanting in the apartment stuttered, then resumed from farther away, like I had put a wall between us that they refused to acknowledge. I closed the door without looking back. At 8:40 p.m., the gecko clicked again from inside the wall. 3 clicks. A pause. 2 clicks. It sounded almost like counting. I let the room sit in its new silence. When I finally lay down, I placed the phone face down on the nightstand and the scissors on top of it. A child's talisman made of cheap faith and cheaper steel. Sleep came in pieces. In one piece, I was at the market stall, the old man counting change with charred fingers that left soot on every coin. In another piece, I was sitting cross-legged on a wooden floor that was warmer than wood should be, while a line of monks swayed without breathing. Every time the chant swelled, I caught myself shaping my mouth around a reply I did not know. At 1:15 a.m., I woke with my jaw clenched and my name on my tongue. I swallowed it like medicine. The fan ticked its soft 3-second loop. The room was dark. Through the curtains, I saw the faint suggestion of cloud light, thick and heavy, promising rain by morning. The soot ring on my wrist was still there. I rubbed it. It did not smear. I thought of Nock's message. "They collect." I thought of the file name on my phone, Siwalee Field. M4. I thought of the white thread that had not been blessed, and how it had known my skin before I knew it was there. I knew what I would do when morning came. I would bring jasmine. I would bring 4 sticks of incense. I would keep my mouth closed. If I had to speak, I would say only my name. But somewhere inside that plan, another plan was already unfurling, thin and stubborn as a new leaf. It did not care about protection. It did not care about sense. It wanted to know how old the chanting really was, and who had first taught the dead to keep time. Morning broke heavy, with grey rain clouds pressing low over Bangkok. The air carried that metallic weight it always does before a storm, sticky against the skin, clinging to clothes. I walked to the small market near the canal, the one Nock had told me about, where vendors sold flowers, candles, incense, and offerings for the temples. I bought a string of jasmine blossoms, still damp with dew. The woman at the stall didn't ask what they were for, but she wouldn't take the money directly from my hand either. She laid her palm flat on the counter and waited for me to place the bills there. When I did, she pinched them by the corners, as if afraid to touch anything more than she had to. By 9:30 a.m., I stood at the gate of Wat Siwalee. It was a modest temple, nothing like the sprawling golden spires you see in the postcards. Its roof tiles were cracked, paint peeling, walls streaked from rain. At first glance, it looked like any other small neighborhood were quiet, unassuming, a place where monks might spend their lives in steady repetition of morning alms, evening chants, and prayer. But there was something else about this place. Not the temple itself, but the people around it. Vendors near the entrance didn't make eye contact. Children playing in the lane kept their distance. Even the stray dogs gave the compound a wide berth, trotting around it as if the air inside the walls carried a charge. I stepped inside with the jasmine in one hand and incense in the other. A man was waiting, not in saffron robes, but in a simple white shirt and loose black trousers. His hair was cut close, his face narrow, with deep lines carved from sun and silence. His eyes found me quickly, and I had the sharp feeling he already knew my name before I spoke it. "You heard them," he said in English, not a question. I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. "Yes," he nodded once, then gestured for me to follow. We walked to a small open pavilion at the side of the temple yard. He motioned for me to place the jasmine and incense on a low wooden table, stained dark from years of offerings. I knelt and did as Nock had told me, no words, only silence. The rain began to fall in thin needles around us, tapping the tin roof above. When I stood, the man studied the soot mark on my wrist. His face remained calm, but his eyes tightened. "They have already touched you," he said. "This is not a small thing. What do they want?" I asked. He shook his head. "Not want. Collect." Wat Siwalee was not built for prayer. It was built for debt. In the old kingdom, monks who broke their vows were sent there. But when they died, the punishment did not end. Their hunger carried on. They chant to bind the next soul, to balance what they lost. The rain thickened. The sound swallowed his words, but his voice cut through clean. "You went too close," you answered. I felt my stomach twist. I remembered whispering, "Stop it," inside the ruins of my apartment. Even if I hadn't been there in flesh, my voice, my name, my reply recorded, noticed, marked. "Can I undo it?" I asked. He considered me for a long moment, then said, "Not undo, only endure. You may walk away. You may fly back to your country. You may hide in a city of millions, but when they call again, you will hear. And if you return, you may not leave twice." I should have been terrified. I should have promised him I would stay away, burn the jasmine, and forget the name of that cursed place. But inside me something rebelled. I had come halfway around the world chasing reinvention, not retreat. I had already lost too much: my marriage, my friends, my sense of home. And now a temple full of dead monks was telling me even my silence belonged to them. "No, I want to see it," I said. The man's face did not change, but the faintest shadow of disappointment passed through his eyes, as if he'd seen this choice before, many times, and it had never ended well. "Then go," he said quietly. "But remember, no chant is ever meant for the living. If you hear them again, and you cannot resist replying, then pray that your name is strong enough to bring you back." He turned away, leaving me with the rain and the jasmine. At 11:15 a.m., I walked out of Wat Siwalee with a knot in my chest. The city around me was still alive: traffic horns, school children in crisp white uniforms, vendors frying morning snacks. But all of it felt like a thin film stretched over something waiting beneath. By the time I reached my apartment, I already knew I wasn't going to listen. I was going to Wat Siwalee. By 9:40 p.m., The city had already folded into its restless night rhythm. Bangkok at night is never truly dark. There's always neon buzzing, tuk-tuks growling, bars spilling music into the alleys. But the road I took out toward the edge of Bangkapi shed its lights one by one the farther I walked. Past the last convenience store, the air grew damp, filled with the smell of river mud and wet bamboo. I carried a flashlight in one hand, my notebook in the other. The sensible part of me, the voice that still belonged to Ohio, to lectures about responsibility and reason, kept whispering to turn back. But another part, the part that had been gnawed hollow for years, pushed me forward. At 10:15 p.m., I reached the first stone marker. It was a squat column half hidden by vines, carved with letters worn down to faint ridges. Lichen and rain had almost erased them, but I could just trace the word Siwalee. My stomach dropped, as if the earth itself had just said my destination out loud. Beyond the marker, the trees thickened, the path narrowed, roots curling up like fingers across the dirt. A crescent moon hid behind heavy clouds, leaving only my flashlight's thin beam to cut the dark. Insects screamed from the undergrowth, but beneath them pulsed a silence so complete it seemed to press against my eardrums. At 10:30 p.m., I saw the temple gates. They weren't grand, just two leaning wooden pillars joined by a cracked lintel. What stopped me cold was the shoes. Rows of sandals and slippers lay neatly at the threshold, men's, women's, even tiny pairs for children. They were wet from old rain, but not rotted, as if they had been placed there only hours ago. No bodies, no voices, just shoes. I stepped over them. Inside the gates, the compound opened like a scar. The main hall sagged. Its roof caved in, gold leaf peeled to reveal blackened wood. Statues of Buddha sat crumbling along the walls, their faces chipped away, eyes hollow. But what chilled me most wasn't the ruin. It was the order. Every broken statue was aligned perfectly, as though some invisible caretaker had arranged them to wait. I set my flashlight on a ledge and scribbled in my notebook. 10:41 p.m. silence. Statues aligned, shoes outside, fields watched. When the first sound came, it was so faint I thought it was the river. A low hum, like wind through a hollow pipe. It grew thicker, layered. Then it resolved into voices, chanting. It rolled through the temple like a tide. Dozens of voices, low and resonant, rising and falling together. The rhythm staggered, then tightened, like a rope being pulled. I held my breath. My skin prickled. The old man's rules thundered in my memory. Do not answer. Do not follow. Do not struggle. At 10:54 p.m., the voices swelled so loudly my ribs vibrated. My flashlight flickered, then died, leaving only the moonlight bleeding through the ruined roof. Shapes moved in the shadows, rows of figures kneeling, robes tattered, heads bowed. Their lips moved in perfect unison, but their chests did not rise. Their lungs did not work. They were not breathing. My throat tightened. Something in my body wanted to reply, to mimic the cadence, to let the rhythm hook into me. I bit down on my tongue hard enough to taste blood. Then, in the middle of that suffocating choir, a single voice broke free. It spoke in English. Michael, my name, dragged across the chant like a nail on glass. Every figure lifted its head. Dozens of eyeless sockets turned toward me at once. The rules. I reminded myself, don't answer, don't answer, don't. The voice came again, Louder, a demand echoing through my skull. Michael Carter. My knees buckled. The air pressed heavier. I clenched the notebook until the paper bent. My pulse slamming against the soot ring still burned around my wrist. They knew me. They had always known me. At 10:56 p.m. I made my first mistake. It wasn't a word, not even a whisper. It was a reflex. My throat convulsed, and a sound escaped, sharp and small, like the beginning of a cough. But the temple heard it. The chanting stopped. Silence dropped so violently it rang in my ears. Every eyeless face locked on me, jaws still parted from the last syllable. The air grew dense, pressing against my chest, and my flashlight rolled off the ledge with a hollow clack that echoed far too long. Then the hands came. Not flesh and bone, not anything living. These were shadows shaped like fingers, dozens of them, sliding across the floor. They curled around my ankles first, cold and dry, dragging across skin like brittle paper. My body stiffened. I tried to move, but the grip tightened, climbing my calves, wrapping my knees. The rules. The old man's voice clawed through my panic. If you feel the hands, do not struggle. But instinct is louder than wisdom. I kicked. I thrashed. My notebook fell, scattering torn pages across the cracked floor. The reaction was immediate. The shadows convulsed, their grip tightening with furious strength. My legs buckled, slamming me to the ground. The soot mark around my wrist burned, glowing faintly in the moonlight, as though branded from within. Michael, the English voice said again, closer this time. The sound didn't come from one throat. It came from all of them. Dozens of mouths moving in imperfect unison, dragging my name out like a rope. The figures rose from their kneeling positions. Their robes scraped the floor, stiff and blackened by fire. Their heads tilted in jerks, necks too long, like puppets pulled by invisible strings. One stepped forward. Its lips moved in the rhythm of the chant. But the voice inside my skull spoke clearly. Debt must be paid. The circle of shadows pulled tighter, dragging me toward the altar at the center of the hall. On it lay a bowl cracked with age, filled not with offerings, but with ashes. The air stank of iron and wet smoke. I clawed at the floor, splinters embedding under my nails. But it made no difference. The hands only pulled harder, dragging me inch by inch. The figures loomed above me, their faces blurring, features melting into the same charred void. At 11 o'clock sharp, the bowl pulsed with a faint red glow. The chanting resumed louder, faster, urgent. My name threaded through it again and again, as though they were weaving me into the prayer. My chest heaved. The air around me thickened. Heavy with smoke, only I seemed to breathe. My tongue tried to shape words. Maybe a plea. Maybe a scream. Anything that escaped would be answering them. And then I remembered Nock's warning. If you must speak, say only your name. It made no sense. But nothing else would save me now. I pressed my lips together, blood from my bitten tongue seeping between my teeth. My body trembled as the shadows hauled me closer to the altar. My face was inches from the cracked bowl, its ashes stirring as if something beneath them breathed. The chant roared. The hands tightened. The air burned my lungs, and I whispered hoarse, raw, desperate, Michael. The bowl split down the middle with a deafening crack. Ashes burst upward like black snow, swirling into the air, coating the statues, the figures, the roofless rafters. The shadows recoiled. snapping back from my legs like struck snakes. The chanting faltered, fractured. The eyeless monks swayed, as if the thread that bound them had been cut. For the first time since stepping inside, I could breathe, but the soot mark on my wrist flared red, searing through my skin. My vision blurred, and a final whisper slithered into my ear, almost tender. "Now we know you." Then everything went dark. When I woke, the night air was colder than it had any right to be. I was lying on the cracked tiles outside the temple gates, my body stiff and damp with dew. The rows of sandals and slippers were gone, not scattered, not overturned, simply vanished, leaving only clean stone in front of the gate. For a moment I convinced myself it had all been a hallucination. The chanting, the shadows, the bowl of ash, maybe I'd fainted from fear or from the humidity, and my mind had filled in the blanks with nightmares. That would have been a mercy. But the soot ring on my wrist was still there, and now it wasn't grey. It was red, angry, as though something alive smoldered under the skin. At 4:12 a.m. I staggered back to my apartment. Bangkok was already stirring awake. Monks on alms rounds, orange robes bright against the grey dawn, vendors setting up carts, the sharp smell of grilled pork rising into the thick morning air. For everyone else, life moved on as if nothing had changed. For me, it had. Inside my apartment, I collapsed onto the bed without undressing, my body shaking with exhaustion. Sleep should have been impossible, but it came fast, dragging me down like a stone tossed into the Chao Phraya River. And that's when I realized the escape wasn't real. I dreamed of the temple again. Not ruins this time, but whole, gold leaf gleaming, statues polished, candles flickering in every corner. The rows of monks were alive, their faces intact, their eyes bright. They chanted not in warning, but in welcome. At the center stood the cracked bowl, now whole and brimming with water so clear I could see my own reflection. Except it wasn't my reflection. The face staring back was gaunt, eyes sunken, skin streaked with soot. When its lips moved, the sound that came out was not mine. "Michael Carter, you're already inside." I jolted awake, drenched in sweat. The clock read 6:30 a.m. The room smelled of wet ash. I stumbled to the bathroom, turned on the light, and shoved my wrist under the faucet. The red mark refused to fade, the water running off in thin black rivulets like ink. I scrubbed until my skin burned raw, but the mark only deepened. My phone buzzed. A message from Nook. "Did you go?" I stared at the screen, unable to type an answer. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. Trembling, another message came. This time without the typing dots that usually preceded her replies. It appeared instantly, like it had been waiting in the queue of the world itself. "You never left." The bathroom mirror fogged though the air was dry, and in the glass, just behind my reflection, I could see rows of eyeless monks kneeling, waiting, their lips moving in silence. By 7:45 a.m. I was back in the market near the canal, clutching my wrist like I could hide the mark by sheer will. The air smelled of rain-soaked herbs and frying oil, but none of it could mask the faint char in my nose, as if my skin still smoked. Nock was waiting at a table, tucked into the corner of a food stall. She looked at me once and knew. Her face paled, lips pressing together, like she was swallowing words she didn't want to say. "You went," she whispered. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My voice felt dangerous now, like even the sound of my breath might trigger something. She reached across the table, but stopped short of touching me. Her eyes went to the mark. They gave you the fie, she said softly. The debt line. What does that mean? My voice cracked. She leaned closer, lowering her tone, so even the vendor behind us couldn't hear. In the old days, when someone owed money to the temple, they tied a thread around his wrist. He could not remove it until he paid. But Wat Siwalee? She shook her head. They collect different things. I pressed harder on the mark, as if I could force it back into my skin. What things? Names, she said simply. Time, breath, sometimes whole lives. They chant until you give it. If you refuse, she trailed off. But her silence was worse than any answer. At 8:20 a.m., the air thickened with the smell of burning. Not from the food stalls, this was different. Sharper. I looked down. Thin tendrils of smoke curled from the soot-red ring around my wrist. No flame, just smoke, rising steadily. Like incense, Nock yanked her chair back, nearly knocking it over. Not here. She hissed. They're calling you again. But it's morning, I said, panic cracking my voice. They only chant at night. Her eyes locked on mine, terrified. No, once they mark you, time does not matter. Morning, night, she swallowed hard. You are inside their hours now. The smoke grew thicker. I felt pressure in my lungs, the faint rhythm of a chant pushing against my ribs, like someone trying to use me as a drum. People in the market began to notice. A man selling lottery tickets stared. A group of women carrying baskets crossed themselves quickly and hurried away. Even the vendor behind the counter stepped back, refusing my money when I tried to pay for tea. Come, Nock snapped. Now. She dragged me through the narrow alleys, the smell of jasmine and charcoal trailing behind. My head throbbed in time with the phantom chanting. By 8:30 a.m., we stood at the door of a run-down house by the canal. This is him, she said, breathless. The monk who left the robe. The door creaked open before she could knock. The man from Wat Siwalee, sharp-eyed, stood there, as if he'd been expecting me. His gaze went immediately to my wrist. They did not just mark you, he said. His voice was flat, resigned. They have opened the account. What account? I demanded. He stepped aside, gesturing me into the dim interior. The air smelled of old incense and river water. On the wall hung dozens of thin white threads, each tied into a loop and nailed into the wood. Some were gray, some black, some burned halfway through. Debts, he said simply. Every person who answered them, every person who tried to leave. My eyes scanned the loops until they snagged on one near the center. It glowed faint red. The knot was identical to the one that had appeared on my wrist. I didn't have to ask whose it was. The man led me deeper into the house, the floorboards creaking beneath each step. The canal outside gurgled low, carrying the smell of stagnant water and rusted boats. Inside, the air was heavy with incense smoke that didn't rise but clung low, swirling around our feet like mist. He pointed to the red loop of thread nailed on the wall, the one that matched the mark on my wrist. It has already started, he said. What has started? My voice was sharp, desperate. The collection. I wanted to laugh, but my chest was too tight. Collection of what? Money. My soul. The man's eyes narrowed, his expression unreadable. Neither. They take what is nearest to you, what you will not notice at first. When the debt grows, they take more. At 9:11 a.m., I felt the first tug. It was subtle, just a hollow space where a memory should have been. I tried to recall the name of my first class that morning. The group of students I had taught only yesterday, the faces floated up in my mind. But their names dissolved before I could hold them. I pressed my temples, trying to force the names back. Nothing. Just a blank sheet where memory had once been written. They start with time, the monk said softly, as though reading me. Moments you think are small, but soon it becomes whole hours, whole days. Knock touched my arm. Michael, look at your wrist. The red soot ring had spread, faint tendrils curling up toward my elbow. It no longer looked like a thread. It looked like smoke, trapped beneath skin, rising. By 10 o'clock, I was back in my apartment, but nothing felt right. I checked the clock twice. Both times, the hands had jumped, skipping minutes. I poured a glass of water, set it down, and when I blinked, the glass was empty. The ice had melted. A half hour had vanished. Then came the breath. At 11:27 a.m., I was standing by the window when the air thickened again. My chest pulled tight, ribs locking, lungs refusing to expand. I clawed at my throat, panic shredding my reason. The room blurred, and I dropped to my knees. Just before blacking out, the chant rippled through me low, steady, cruel. When air finally returned, I was sprawled on the floor, coughing, throat raw. The clock read 11:58 a.m., 30 minutes gone. Stolen. On the table, my notebook lay open. I hadn't touched it since the temple, but new words were scratched across the page in jagged black strokes. Debt is breath. Debt is time. Debt is name. My stomach knotted. My hand shook as I reached for the pen, desperate to write something, anything that was mine. But the pen would not move. The page resisted, as though the notebook itself belonged to someone else now. At noon sharp, the chanting rose again, not from the walls, not from the air, but from inside my chest, each syllable vibrating against my ribs. I doubled over, clutching myself, and for a heartbeat I realized I wasn't just hearing them anymore. I was joining them,